so he can give us instructions on how to participate in this meeting.
Yes, thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to the members of the board. Sorry, that was my son. Thanks to the members of the board, staff, and the public for joining us this evening. This is the February 16th regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors. This meeting has been advertised in accordance with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act as a virtual meeting conducted using the Zoom telemeeting platform. Additionally, the township's conference bridge has been made available and can be accessed by dialing the township's main line at 814-238-4651 and entering extension 3799 when prompted. If you're joining the Zoom meeting tonight as a member of the public or as an agent to speak on behalf of an agenda item, when you are called on to speak, if you could just mention your name, municipality of residence, and if applicable, the topic you wish to speak on by using the chat feature located at the bottom of the screen, or when you're enabled to talk, you can announce it too, and we can record it for the purposes of minutes. Prior to beginning the meeting, just a couple of procedural items to go over. First, this meeting has been structured as a webinar format, which means that attendees will not be permitted to speak unless acknowledged by the chair and enabled by the host. I'll provide instruction on how the public may engage and speak on any agenda item at the appropriate time. Secondly, board members are asked to indicate their name when either motioning or seconding a motion so that the minutes may accurately reflect the action taken. And then lastly, I'll take a roll call of the Board of Supervisors to ensure that all members can hear and interact using the Zoom meeting platform. Please indicate you're here when your name is called. Ms. Danini?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Mitra?
Here.
Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Strickland?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First, let's give a go at the Pledge of Allegiance virtual style.
I will.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Before we go to citizens' input, Ms. Lisa Strickland would like to read something in relation to some news that we recently received here in Ferguson Township.
Thank you, Laura. On January 21st, 2016, the life of Jean Tuggy of Pine Grove Mills was tragically cut short by a murderer who, until last week, remained at large. The charges filed against Christopher Kowalski on January 8th will not bring Jean Tuggy back to us, but it will hopefully bring closure to her friends and family who have had to grieve her loss, knowing that her killer remained free. On behalf of the Board of Supervisors, I wish to congratulate and commend the hard work of the Ferguson Township Police Department in bringing Jean's killer to justice. I would especially like to recognize the cold case team and the Criminal Investigation Unit, particularly Detective Caleb Klaus, for their tireless hours spent following leads and ensuring that no stone was left unturned. We would also like to acknowledge and congratulate Special Investigator Chris Weaver and the Office of the Attorney General, as well as the Pennsylvania State Police and the Isle of Palms Police Department of South Carolina for their assistance in this investigation. This was truly a team effort, and while we still mourn the loss of Jean Tuggy and grieve as a community alongside her family, we now do so with a peace of knowing that justice has been served. For our cold case team, however, we know that the celebration will be short-lived as they will continue to focus all their resources on finding the missing persons, Jennifer Shadle and Cindy Song. We, as a board, are proud of the accomplishments of the Ferguson Township Police Department, and I, Lisa Strickland, would like to read the following commendation into the record and move to approve the same. Whereas on January 21st, 2016, the life of Jean Tuggy of Pine Grove Mills was tragically cut short when she was murdered in her own home by an armed assailant. And whereas under the leadership of Chief Christopher Albright, the Ferguson Township Police Department formed a cold case team in 2018 to bring Jean Tuggy's murderer to justice. And whereas Detective Caleb Klaus was selected to lead the team in their pursuit of justice for the unresolved criminal investigations that have shaken our community and left the loved ones of the victims mourning and unable to find closure. And whereas thanks largely to the coordination of the Ferguson Township Police Department, the cold case team, the Pennsylvania State Police, and the Office of the Attorney General, a suspect confessed to the murder of Gene Tuggy, and charges of criminal homicide were filed on February 8th, 2021. And whereas the conclusion of this investigation will help bring peace of mind to the friends and family of the victim, and knowing that the perpetrator of this heinous crime will be held accountable. Now, therefore, the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors hereby commends the tireless efforts of the Ferguson Township Police Department, especially the cold case team led by Detective Caleb Klaus, in bringing the murder of Gene Tuggy to justice.
I'll second that motion, Lisa. Thank you very much. All in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Chief, for your leadership and the entire team that brought this case to resolution.
Thank you, and thank you for this recognition. I'll be sure to pass it along to all the officers. Thank you.
And next, we'll move on to citizens' input for items that are not on the agenda. And if you could, please state your name and your township of residence if you care to speak at this time.
I think for this, if any attendees wish to be acknowledged, if you just use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen, if you wish to speak at citizens input, and I can bring you on to enable you to speak. I don't see anybody.
Okay, thank you, Dave. All right, and next we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. And prior to that, I'd like to state for the record that prior to this meeting at 6:00 p.m., the Ferguson Board of Supervisors had an executive session on two matters, one of personnel and one of land acquisition. That said, I'll take a motion to approve the January 12th, 2021 Stormwater Management Utility Fee Work Session minutes and the February 1st, 2021 Board of Supervisors regular meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Patty.
Thank you, Steve and Patty. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we'll move on to special reports. Our first report of the evening will be the COVID-19 response report by Township Manager Dave Prabalka.
Thank you and good evening. Just a few short updates to provide this evening. And as always, on any items of regional or local significance to the pandemic response, residents can find more detail by visiting the Center Region Ready Facebook page or the COG website at crcog.net. There's also information available at the Township's website and the Borough State College website. Township administrative offices remain open to the public this week during limited hours. The lobby will be open between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. Police lobby remains open during regular business hours. Staff continues to work a mixture of remote and in-office schedules, so please be encouraged to make any appointments to meet with specific staff so we can make arrangements ahead of time. All meetings and appointments, except under extenuating circumstances, are being done virtually until further notice. Regionally, the COG Public Safety Committee directed staff to submit letters urging the Pennsylvania Department of Health to coordinate an improved vaccine distribution process. A similar request will be considered by the Board of Supervisors on the consent agenda later this evening. On Friday, the department did issue an order requiring all vaccine distribution locations to provide telephone access as well as web access to register for the vaccine. This order will become effective on February 19th, which is this Friday. Furthermore, Mount Nittany Medical Center will be allocated an additional allotment, although how much kind of remains to be determined, of vaccines in the near future. And more information on both the improved registration process as well as vaccine availability will be shared by the township and regional staff once it becomes available. Countywide, there have been 11,398 confirmed cases and 59,382 negative cases reported on the Pennsylvania COVID-19 dashboard as of February 15th. There have been 206 deaths attributable to the virus in the county. In Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania, the confirmed number of cases has reached 775,305, and an additional 121,555 probable cases with 23,119 deaths. More information on local conditions and response efforts can be accessed through both the Ferguson Township and the Borough State College website. That concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have. And again, I just want to conclude my report by thanking the residents and business owners in the township for their patience and understanding as we continue to recover from this unprecedented crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Does anyone have any questions for Dave? Okay, seeing no questions, we'll move on to our next report for the evening. Ms. Barbara Ziff will give us our SCLO Center Region Library report.
And I'm actually going to bring on both Barbara and Sue Werner as soon as I can find her in the list here. There we go. Okay, both Barbara and Susan, you should be able to speak.
Is Sue here? Oh,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on what's happening at SCLO Library. I'd like to begin by introducing you to Ferguson's new library trustee, Barbara Ziff. I don't know if you can see her or not, but she's been an active volunteer at the library, and we welcome her to the board. I'm sure that Barbara will get to meet you all in person, hopefully soon. The next time that we will report to you, SCLO will have a new director. Kathy Alloway has been with us for over 10 years and has done an outstanding job. She will definitely be missed, but she is leaving SCLO in very good shape for the new director. A COVID update from the library. The library continues to provide door-side pickup and public computing by appointment. The staff and board monitor local COVID infection and vaccination rates as the library prepares for an eventual return to normalcy later this year. The SCLO Foundation's annual fundraising campaign was the most successful ever. We thank everyone for their help. Obviously, the community values SCLO. The library has seen a 40% increase in the use of e-resources, including ebooks, e-audiobooks, and streaming movies in 2020 due to the pandemic. As soon as we were forced to close our doors last March, our librarians quickly pivoted to packing the digital library with new content, and residents responded with enthusiasm. The library is now loaning Wi-Fi internet modems for 6-week periods. The T-Mobile units were made possible by a grant from Center Foundation. This certainly helps those who do not have internet access. And lastly, once again, Ferguson wins a prize. In 2020, the busiest remote book return was at North Atherton Giant, which had 23,423 items returned to it. The Clearfield Bank book return on Route 45 had 3,323 returns. This extra service is appreciated by all, and we thank Ferguson for helping us do this. I entertain any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. Do any board members have any questions? Okay, looks like no, and welcome aboard to Ms. Barbara Ziff.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your report. All right, let's move on to the third report of the evening. Ms. Brandy Robinson with the Ferguson Township Climate Action Committee report.
Thank you. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you for giving me a couple of minutes of your time tonight to talk to you a little bit about what we've been up to. What I wanted to do tonight is two things. I want to give you our finalized baseline inventory results and then talk to you a little bit about what I hope that our committee can continue to do now that that's completed. So this slide is just an updated version of one that I shared with you the last time I visited the board. However, with some refinement of more recent updates to protocols that are used and emissions factors that we use to calculate overall emissions, as well as a better representation of what our actual natural gas consumption was, This has changed a little bit. So this is now a more complete and accurate picture of what that 2016 baseline for Ferguson Township is. The numbers have changed a little bit. I think that when I presented this to you before, we were right around 190,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And now we're up to just over 222,000. But what hasn't really changed are the proportions of emissions based on sector. So as you can see here, energy consumption continues to be our dominant sector, and this isn't surprising. This follows state and national trends as well. Transportation for us comes in second, and then ag waste and water and wastewater make up just 15% of our emissions. So these numbers serve a couple of purposes. First, this gives us a benchmark against which we can measure future success for any reduction measures that we implement, right? This gives us that baseline scenario of, well, if we say we want to make these numbers better, we need to know what they are first. And then finally, I think it gives us a really good roadmap of thinking about where we want to target our efforts. By far, the biggest piece of our pie here is energy. And so that represents our biggest opportunity for improvement. And this is really good news because the energy sector has a lot of low-hanging fruit in it, because anything that we can do to increase energy efficiency and therefore reduce energy consumption also reduces the amount that residents and commercial entities are paying for energy. So these projects are not what you would call a hard sell. So the report that I believe that Dave shared with you as part of the agenda packet for this meeting, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to highlight some of the details. While the narrative of the report is important and worthwhile, and I hope everyone has a chance to read it at some point, because it talks a lot about the potential impacts of climate change for our community, I wanted to call your attention to what I feel like what some of the most practically useful information in the report is and where that is. And so there are a couple of tables in the appendix. This one sort of breaks those emission sectors down a little bit more so that you can see what it is within each of those sectors that's contributing to the emissions. And so this is important because you'll want to use this for anyone revisiting this down the road who wants to replicate the inventory. We'll need this information to know exactly what was included. And this is just a screen capture of the actual summary table. And then this, the other thing that was really important to us when we started this work was making sure that it was replicable. So we wanted to ensure that we left a detailed sort of trail of breadcrumbs, right? So that should we all abandon our email and move to a remote island somewhere, the township could replicate the work that we did for a future year and know that they were able to do an apples to apples comparison of the two inventories. So for every type of data that we've entered here in the inventory, we've described the methodology that was used to calculate those emissions and the emissions factors that went into that. And so this information, and this is just a snippet for part of the energy data, is included not only in the inventory report that we've provided you, but it's also baked into the inventory software ClearPath that we use to complete this inventory. So there are notations in there about which protocols we used, which emissions factors sets, all of those things are there. And in most cases, to be honest, these things are really straightforward and pretty expected. But there were a few instances where we kind of had to make some assumptions and do some extrapolation to get the data to be what we needed it to be. The natural gas was a really good example. The data that we got from Columbia was just for Center County. So we had to make some assumptions about that, and we aligned what we did with what the Center Region regional plan is also doing. And so that's all described in here as well. And so this will help ensure that, if the people who happen to do subsequent inventories for you aren't the people who worked on the first one, that you can make sure that you're getting a look at the same parameters. So where does Ferguson fit into the regional inventory that Pam Adams has been working on? Well, we're about 27% of the total emissions, a little bit more than a quarter. So I included this breakdown of the COG emissions by sector here. As you'll see, it's pretty similar to our own emissions by sector, our own emissions profile by sector. There's a couple of key differences, right? Agriculture is about half here of what it is for us, and that makes sense. And transportation's a little bit less for the region in general compared to us. We're at 24%, they're at 20%, and then a bigger share of those emissions are coming then from the energy sector. So the numbers are shifted a little bit, but proportionally, we're looking at the same sectors of influence here. The other thing that I would note here is that in our inventory, we break out energy by residential, commercial, and industrial sources. And in the regional inventory, it's only broken out by residential, and then commercial also includes industrial sources. It's just the way that we each acquired the data from West Penn Power. So that's why it's a little bit different between those two inventories. So the thing I really wanted to talk to you about, now that we've got the inventory done, what are we going to do with it, right? So the pandemic has kind of made traditional opportunities for outreach and engagement a bit more challenging, but not impossible. There's still a lot going on here in the township and the region this spring that I think will help us advance our goals of better understanding how we can prioritize actions that achieve reductions and other co-benefits that are good for the community as well. So the first thing that's going to be happening is thanks to a partnership between the Pennsylvania Municipal League, Sustainable Pittsburgh, and the Nature Conservancy, Ferguson Township is piloting a community resilience building workshop model. And the whole idea behind this is that you bring together community stakeholders to figure out how we can understand the relationship between hazards and planning efforts, and sort of evaluate our own strengths and weaknesses as a community, and then prioritize actions that will make us more resilient to those hazards and future climate impacts. That process has just started. We just had our first meeting about that last week. I was excited that I was included in that meeting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where that takes us. So I don't think we know a whole lot about this process yet, but the timing is really good for this because the region also has a couple of exciting events happening this spring that will help us advance our goals of figuring out how we're going to get to our 2050 net zero target, right? So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is that in the spring, COG is going to undertake a survey of residents and business owners here in the Center region to sort of gauge their understanding and concerns about climate change right here in our region, the causes of it, the consequences of it, and what we can do about it. What will be interesting is that this survey will break down the demographics. We'll know the respondents by their township, so we'll be able to get a good sense of what respondents from our township are most concerned about as it relates to climate change. And then the other related event that's happening is that COG is hosting, in partnership with an environmental mediation course that's taught by Laura Fowler at the Penn State Law School, a virtual community climate change forum. And this forum seeks to bring together interested residents, business owners, and other stakeholders to discuss priority actions for reducing emissions and building resiliency as part of the Center Region's climate action and adaptation planning process that's going on this year. So all of these things are sort of swirling together. And I think that our actions and efforts here in Ferguson Township fit very nicely under this regional umbrella. And, you know, I'm excited to see how we can work together with the regional effort to help inform it and make sure that that it's working well for Ferguson residents. And so specifically, I wanted to talk to you and really ask you about what opportunities there are for our committee or some subsequent committee after ours to continue to help with this process. I think I can speak for all of my committee members when I say that we've really enjoyed being part of this process, and we're eager to figure out how we can continue to make Ferguson an even better place to live while addressing these climate change concerns, both from the causes of climate change right down to the consequences that we'll feel here at home. So we've spent a lot of time as a committee over the past year aligning our efforts with the efforts that have emerged at the regional scale under Pam Adams' leadership. You know, we recognize that our municipalities certainly have unique characteristics that influence our emissions reductions and our adaptation planning efforts. But I think we can all agree that as a whole, regionally, we have more in common that unites us than separates us as far as this is concerned. And so, you know, if you think about the fact that our residents identify with living in the State College area more than maybe their specific township designation, I think it makes sense for us to all work together on this. And so we've been working closely with Pam and watched as this regional inventory sort of spun up and was completed very quickly and efficiently. And Pam's got this climate action and adaptation plan well underway. This is taking shape later this year, and we're eager to keep Ferguson as a leader among the townships in pursuing these regional efforts. So our next step with your support, I think, is that we need to establish interim targets to support the overall net zero goal for township emissions by 2050 that was established in the 2017 resolution. So those interim targets, though, aren't going to do us any good if we don't have a plan for achieving them. And I think that the best way for us to do this is in consultation with Pam and the regional efforts that will develop over the course of this spring, from inputs from the survey, from inputs from the community forum, and from input that we will get from our community resiliency building workshop here in the township. I think that we see considerable opportunity, particularly in the commercial energy sector. So Center County was recently approved for the CPACE program, which is commercial property assessed clean energy. And it's a financial mechanism by which you can incentivize the adoption of energy efficiency measures in commercial settings. I think that this will be a dominant component both of early regional action and what we should focus on here in Ferguson Township, because it will help support our local business owners and operators in reducing their overall energy costs, which will reduce our emissions. And just a couple final thoughts. You know, I recognize, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that climate change isn't everyone's top priority, and I don't even think that it should be. But I do think that we want to figure out how we can investigate what our other priorities are as a township and align those with the emissions reductions and resiliency building efforts that we need. So I think that, you know, focusing on the co-benefits of the actions we can take to reduce emissions and build resiliency and continue to make Ferguson a great place to be will also, you know, serve us well as we explicitly try to address the climate concerns. So one idea that we have for a concrete step as a committee that we could take over the course of the next year would be to take a good look at our township ordinances from a climate action lens. You know, get a sense of how many of our current ordinances align with our stated goals to reduce emissions, and what can we do to leverage those ordinances to achieve those goals. And so I think that that's one area where we can really dig in and continue to do some work for you. And then finally, I think that as we look to the future and where this will take us in terms of meeting resolution goals, we're going to need to measure our emissions again. And, you know, the regional inventory is going to be updated regularly. So I don't think that there's a strong need for us to, for example, have annual inventories. However, I do think that we should do a Ferguson specific inventory for the years 2030 and 2040 so that we can measure how close we are to reaching our interim targets and know if we have to adjust and tweak in order to get to where we want to be by 2050. And I think that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have. I want to thank the board and everyone for their time tonight. I know you've got a full agenda.
Thank you very much, Brandy. Do any board members have any questions or comments for Brandy? Okay, seeing none, I guess I guess I have one comment. Really from your presentation, I can see really there's multiple areas that we can potentially focus on. One is in our ordinances, as you've mentioned, and I was surprised to see in the report that we had implemented low impact design ordinances, because I didn't realize we had already embarked on that, but that'd be something that I'd be very interested in moving forward. If there's any way that we can, continue on that path and build on what we've already done. Another is township operations and also COG operations. I think this is something that we talked about a fair amount early on, but mostly seems to have slipped off the radar in terms of a goal. There's a lot of focus on that outreach component, and I understand why. It leads me to the third area of improvement, which is everything that's completely outside of our control. And so that's homeowners converting their residences to clean and green energy, it's commercial and that kind of stuff. And so I guess I'll just advocate for us to not forget that the things that are in our control are something that we can make pretty rapid change on, as opposed to kind of that outreach and relying on others. Although I will acknowledge they're a drop in the bucket when you look at the larger picture. But really want to thank you for all the work that you've done and all the time that you've put in. It's just a really, it's a great asset for our township. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of it. And you're absolutely right. You've brought up a really good point that there are things that we have much tighter control over. And while that sphere of influence feels relatively small, I do think that your point is very well taken about bringing that back to the forefront, because I think that that could serve a really useful purpose then when we go out to the broader outreach, right? We want to be practicing what we're preaching.
Absolutely.
So if we can demonstrate that our township operations have tightened up their efficiencies in ways X, Y, and Z, that provides a little bit more incentive for our residents and business owners to care a little bit more about it as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Lisa.
I just want to thank you for the report also. It's so comprehensive and easy to read. As a non-expert in this field, I thought it was really clear, and I appreciated all that work that you put into it. Just kind of, I had noticed that too, Laura, the low impact development standards in the zoning ordinance rewrite. So I'd be interested in looking at what you all found and identified in that too, and then absolutely pursuing that. And that could be something, if there are some folks on the Planning Commission who are interested in that, I'm sure they'd be really interested in getting back into that and looking a little bit more deeply.
But one thing that I didn't mention that might end up being useful, particularly as we dig into things like that, is the organization that manages the software that we used to do our inventory, ICLEI for local governments. So just this week, they announced a couple of new features that paying members like Ferguson Township have access to that I think might be really useful for us moving forward, including there's a new searchable database of all of their hundreds of municipality members, where I can do a query to say, who's done this in their township, and it'll pull them up with descriptions and contact information for the people in those municipalities so that we can reach out to them and figure out, hey, what worked well and what maybe didn't work well, and learn from other member municipalities trial and errors as well. So I think that might be beneficial to us moving forward.
Absolutely agree. Thank you so much, Brandy, for bringing that idea forward. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, great. Thanks very much, Brandy. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay, and we will move on now to unfinished business. First order of business is a continued public hearing on an ordinance of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a utility fee for stormwater collection and management. And Dave, I'll pass it to you to introduce this.
Yes, thank you. Before I do, I've been asked to announce this in prior meetings, so I'll just announce that we have 48 attendees, and I'll talk a little bit more about public engagement at the appropriate time. Provided with your agenda this evening is a copy of the ordinance advertised for our continuation of the public hearing, as well as action this evening on an ordinance establishing a stormwater management utility fee. The ordinance was reviewed by the board on the February 1st regular meeting, and a public hearing was conducted. There were also several prior discussions. The ordinance that's advertised establishes the billing unit methodology and procedure, the appeal process, exemptions and credits, and the enforcement provisions associated with the program. Really, the only substantive change that was made subsequent to the February 1st discussion was to reflect that the revenue for the stormwater utility fee that is lost, I guess, through the invocation of credits will be supplemented through interfund transfers from the township's general fund into the township's stormwater fund. This is also reflected in the exemptions portion of the ordinance as well. If enacted, the ordinance would go into effect on January 1st, 2022. And then, as I said, at the appropriate time, I'll ask Centrise to share the slide that has the sign-up information for public to speak, but I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, to take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave, for that introduction and good synopsis of where we are now. The first thing I'm going to do is, because this is a public hearing, open up the floor to public comment on the ordinance. If you'd like to speak, please state your name and your township of residence. And I would like to prioritize, if we can, anybody who has not had an opportunity to speak at the beginning of the public hearing at our last meeting.
Centrise, if you can share the sign-up sheet for the Google Doc. And then there's also a link that Nick Figaro just placed in the chat as well. So you can use that to sign in. And then I'll announce to the chair as folks sign up.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Centrise. And thank you, everyone, for bearing with us as we move through our virtual meeting.
I don't have any responses. Do you have a hand? Had a hand go up and go down.
I am assuming we will have some public comment for this, but perhaps I am incorrect, and perhaps folks are here to comment on other components that would be supporting the ordinance.
I'll just say, the form is a few fields to fill out. Maybe some folks are still signing in. If the board wants to circle back on the public comment, it's up to you all. If you want to give it another minute or two for anybody to sign up, or even, the crowd is small enough that I suppose we could, use the raise hand feature as well.
Yeah, I think that that sounds like a good option, Dave. I'd rather I appreciate your suggestions, but maybe rather would try to follow public comment first since it's a public hearing. But yeah, if the crowd is small enough that we can use the raise hand feature, that's fine with me.
I do have one request from Fred Grau. I can bring Mr. Grau on to speak.
That would be great.
I think we just got in. Can you hear me?
You're
Yes.
there. Okay, great. It's not as easy as it sounds on this end. Okay, I have two things in general. I'll try to be quick because, of course, you've heard from me before. Two things. At the end of the last meeting, Lisa Strickland brought up something that I thought was very important. And that was, I'm going to call it a compromise between all of us who are very much against this, the whole ordinance, and the people that are for it. And I thought it was quite rational. I think it deserves serious consideration, even before a vote. Well, it's, in fact, especially before a vote. And that is to implement the township itself, to implement the practical aspects of the ordinance for another 6, 9, I don't know, maybe even 12 months, and see how it works before you come down with, basically what's going to be a permanent ordinance. And it leads me to my second one, and this is really brief, is that it's apparent to me as a spectator here that the body politic is very much against this. Now, the people for it, on the board and staff, we understand it, but with each individual supervisor, if you do vote this thing up today, you will be voting against the people who put you there to represent you. And that's really all I have to say. And thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Grau. I appreciate your comments.
Next gentleman we have here signed up is Gregory Harold. I should note too, before, just in response to Mr. Grau's comments, staff has no recommendation for or against these ordinances or the resolutions that you'll hear. And I should have made that clear in my introduction. This is purely a fiscal policy decision that's rests with the Board of Supervisors. So, sorry about that. Okay, Mr. Harold, you should be able to speak.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just wondering, as far as the stormwater management ordinance, why is the fee needed? Is the Public Works not able to handle maintenance or what's needed for stormwater runoff? Hello?
Yes, typically this time we're just taking public comment, not necessarily responding unless it's really questions about implementation and effects on, particular property or something like that. You'll likely hear during the deliberation of the board a response to why the policymakers either do or do not feel that the ordinance is warranted.
So when is the public hearing, or this is what's going on right now?
That's right. Basically, we'll take all the public comment first to allow for the voices of the public to be heard prior to our deliberation. And so the board then, right after the public comment, will talk about the ordinance, and then it will lead to a vote this evening.
And is that a vote of the board?
That's right.
Okay, so you're taking, okay, well, I'm, put me down for not being in agreement with it. And I think it puts our farmers at quite a disadvantage.
Thank you very much for your comment. You're welcome to elaborate more on that if you should choose.
I don't have anybody else signed up at the moment. No further hands in the, oh, there is a hand that just, oh, there's a hand that keeps going up and going down, but I can't see who it is in time. So if, whomever it is, if you want to raise your hand, leave it up if you wish to speak, and then I can bring you on. Okay, Diane, on here.
Diane, it looks like
Hello?
you're on, and there you go. You got it. We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I'm kind of challenged when it comes to using Zoom. I've had some comments before. I'm still against the stormwater fee. Concerns I have is that we spent $250,000 on a consultant to establish the best way to have a fee. But I don't see where we really looked at what other alternatives there were to funding the repairs. And it seems to me that, you know, we just spent multi-million dollars on a new building. We have the best equipment in the county. And it seems to me that we should be able to tighten our belts a little bit and absorb this into the regular budget without implementing a fee. My other concern is that the Board of Supervisors has the ability to either increase or decrease the fee. And we all know it's never going to decrease. So I appreciate the fact that you've taken input and have adjusted the proposal, but it seems to me that this is pretty much a done deal, that you guys aren't even considering whether we should have a fee or not. It's more how the fee is going to be structured.
Thank you very much, Diane, for your comments.
I believe that's all. Let me just check one more time in the sign-in sheet. That's everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to those that made comments. So we'll move to board discussion. And sometimes we'll take a motion first. In this case, I'll go with discussion first. Would any board members like to speak on the matter at hand? Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment with the comments we had. One thing I would say as far as trying to incorporate this without a fee is I really think we've been doing that for a long time. The stormwater, I think what sort of prompted us to be looking at this as a possible way of funding stormwater costs and maintenance costs was the fact that it is a growing part of our budget. And essentially the budget is not adequate to absorb everything that needs to be done. It's not a question of whether the Public Works Department is doing its job. It is, and it's costing money. Some things here will be done in-house, others will be by contract, but all of them have expenses associated that have been part of the budget prior to this year and will continue to be part of the budget and growing. So I think this is one way of addressing by isolating those particular expenses and saying they warrant a separate part of the budget so that we can address them through the fee. Clearly, we're not all in agreement on that, and I think when the vote comes, it will probably not be unanimous. I would say, though, that we are looking at more than just how the fee will be implemented. I think it may look that way because that's where the discussion has been, But ultimately, the question is, are we going to do it or not? And we had to develop what it is that we're deciding to do or not to do. And that was the process we followed for some time now. When the vote comes, it'll be a question of, is this what we want to do? But we had to develop what it is that we're proposing before we can vote yes or no on that proposal. So I guess those would be my comments at this point.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that comment. So just before we move on to further board discussion, the manager has alerted me that a few other hands went up, and I really want to make sure that we provide time and space for any public comments. So I'm sorry, but I'd like to hop back to public comment. I do want folks, if they can at this point in time, you know, it's okay to have your hand up and just keep it up. So if you do have a comment that you want to make on this ordinance, if you can put your hand up, and I'll say that, you know, sometimes it's difficult to find where that hand is. Sometimes if you haven't updated Zoom, it's in one place or another place. So if anybody's having trouble, you know, Dave, if you could, I don't know, help folks navigate to that. If folks can chat to you, is that something that can happen, that folks can chat to you and you can help them?
Yeah, the chat works. The chat would go to all panelists, so anybody should be able to view it.
Okay, great.
We'll have the sign-in sheet open, and then of course there's the hand until the public hearing is closed. You can use either one of those.
Great. So if you're having any trouble navigating Zoom, you can find that chat down there at the bottom of the screen and click on that, and then send a message to, you know, out to the universe, and we'll get back to you. So Dave, yes, let's recommence with the public comment with the hands up.
All right, Mr. Harner, you should be okay if you unmute your, should be able to speak.
How's that?
Great.
Yep. Good. I just think, my name is Dan Harner. I think we need to thank the board, the committee members from the township and the staff for the amount of work they put in on this, and I think it's been huge. And having been a member of the board a number of years ago, I can attest to the amount of time it takes to work through some of these more complex problems. So I have a short statement or a summary of my thoughts I'd like to read. And I'll begin by saying it appears that most government programs from the state down, including the schools and some of the COG programs, will have funding problems this year, all of which will have to be addressed in the near future. Frankly, I think the proposal before you should be put on a shelf and other alternatives explored. And I want to address one that was on a state level, which was the emissions testing program. The people that have been here for a while probably aware of that. There's one of those testing stations right down the road from us, and it's a large gray brick block building, about 800 feet from the intersection of West College Avenue and Whitehall Road, going towards Pine Grove Mills. So at one time, the program was you would take your car to one garage to get it inspected, and then you would take your car to the emission testing station to get it tested for emissions. So you could conceivably spend all day running around from the inspection station at your local garage to the emission station at the other end of town to get your car squared away for the yearly inspection. That program was much farther along than this program in the fact that the buildings had already been built for this case, for that program. So I think that's one thing to look at when we think, well, you spent a couple $100,000 on a consultant and all this time and everything. It's never too late to back away from a program. I think now, everybody realizes that if you need to get your car inspected, you just go to one place and get everything done at one time. So it's a much easier and simpler program to administer. I think it's a lot easier on the residents of the township. And my understanding of the cost of this is my house is 1,200 square feet. My cost would be, I think, if I understood right, about $119 a year. In my case, that would be the equivalent of almost a 90% increase in my real estate taxes. And I think that's a substantial increase, and I think that's something that really hasn't been addressed. I'd also say that the board is not required to put all the costs on the homeowners. I don't think there's any reason that a portion couldn't be on the earned income side of the equation, unless providing a fair solution for those on fixed incomes. Those funds that were raised to be placed in a general fund with no increase in staff and would be reviewed yearly during the budget process, so that annually you would look at how much money is being spent in this program. If you need more money or you need less money, rather than having a fixed ordinance that defines the amount every single year. Now, just in summary, let me say this. At your last meeting, the problems relating to the vaccine rollout were discussed. Now, as it turns out, I went online to find out who was the most successful at administering this vaccine. And as it turns out, the most successful state administering was West Virginia. I happened to see an interview with the governor of West Virginia discussing their process. After answering at some length, questions at some length, he concluded by saying, if I send someone out in the field to count the cows, I just want them to count the cows. I don't want them to count the legs and divide by 4. So I think, sometimes the most simple solution is the best solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harner. Dave, do we have another person with their hand up?
Nobody with their hand up or signed up on the sheet. Actually, we do have one in the chat. I'm sorry, before I forget.
Yep.
I'm going to bring Denny and Ann. Oh, I lost him.
Yep.
Okay. Oh.
Yep.
Okay. Denny and Ann, you should be on if you can unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, yeah, I'm Denny Malachowski. I've been a resident of Ferguson Township for over 38 years. First of all, I'd like to commend the road crew for a job really well done last night. It was very challenging, and they did a great job, as they always do. So my thanks to all of them. As for this fee, I've been on almost all your Zoom meetings, which are difficult for a lot of people to do this. You can see tonight, I couldn't even log in and ask a question. I had to go through the chat room. Probably a lot of people aren't even left on here yet. But anyway, I heard over 98% of the callers are opposing this fee. Yeah, and I've heard from farmers and business owners and homeowners and even a really well-respected geologist, who resides in this township. You have a great wealth of knowledge here, and you need to listen to them and maybe invite them to a committee, kind of like what Diane was saying here, and get some local ideas, not this vendor that you paid $500,000 to. Listen to your community. But anyway, I actively participated in gathering signatures a couple months back, that were presented to all of you. And it was in opposition to this fee. And I found that just walking around a community and knocking on doors, that 85% of the people aren't even aware of it. And I directed them to your site, and a lot of people said, well, I'm not going to sign something carte blanche. And I said, well, go to the site and see what you're going to pay. 100% of the people signed it after looking at that. And the point is that most people aren't aware that their taxes are going up on average of 50%. So if this tax is in their best interest, why not have a referendum in the May primary and let the people decide for themselves by vote? You know, and I asked people in Center County and Huntington County and Clearfield and even Washington County, where I'm from. I have a very good friend who's a municipal lawyer down there. None of them ever even heard of a fee like this. Yeah, so what's the hurry to get this thing passed? You still have time to do the right thing, you know, and a lot of people will be watching how you vote. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and your comment.
I have Harold. Harold, you should be up.
Yep, you're on.
Good evening, and I thank you all for what you do. I've had engineers in my backyard for the last 8 to 12 months. What am I paying in tax dollars to have them assess how many trees I have to be removed from my backyard? I thank you for taking my question.
I'm sorry, if you could provide a little bit of clarification. I'm not sure I understand the question about the tree removal.
I've had engineers in my backyard telling me that they are looking to help us with stormwater in our backyard, which it's when it rains hard. And if you remember, about 2 springs ago, we had the heaviest rain we've had in history. And I had engineers walking through my backyard telling me that they hope that they don't have to take so many trees out, and we're clueless. And finally, there's a public hearing, and I can talk to the people that are making the rules. And I just wondered how much it cost us just to have the engineers come through our backyard and do the assessment.
Thanks. And in what neighborhood was that, if you don't mind?
Park Hills. No, Park Hills.
Okay, the Park Hills Drainage Way project, I believe you're referring.
It's killing us down here. Yep. We are the ones that are getting hit and need this the most. And I got to tell you, I'm probably one of the people that are against it the most.
I mean, I guess we can, if the board wants, we can respond in relative to the cost of the, I'm not sure when you say, Harold, engineers are walking around in your backyard, whether you're talking about our staff, maybe Dave Modricker has some clarification that he can bring to light, but I don't know whether this is the time. I'll look to the board for direction on whether you want us to respond at this point or not.
No, and I don't mind. I don't care if
Please,
you respond.
let me hear from the board first.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind some kind of a bridge or some clarification there. For me, one of the projects that's gotten pushed off for 30 years that's continuing to get worse is the Park Hills Drainage Way, because we did not, as a board, many iterations, ever allocate the appropriate funding to it, and the problem gets worse. So I see that as an aspect, but if we could form a bridge between that and what this gentleman is saying for the board, that would be helpful.
Either Dave or Ron, if you want to add.
Yeah, I can try. It took me a little while to understand what Mr. Harold was referring to. But the Park Hills Drainage Project, for those that are, listening, and as the board knows, is a project that has been considered probably over the last 30 years. And in recent years, the last couple of years, it's moved forward through the capital improvement program. And the Park Hills Drainage Way project is the remediation of a drainage way that during most of the year is dry, but during heavy rains is, I'll use the term a gully washer, and it does wash a lot of sediment, and there are a lot of eroded banks and exposed utilities. So the project is actually one of the projects included in the program for the proposed stormwater fee. So it is one of the capital projects that's proposed. We're currently in the design phase, moving into the utility relocation phase. and subject to, adequate funding and board approval, will go to construction in a couple of years. Ron Seibert, the township engineer, on our behalf, sent out a mailing recently to adjoiners to invite them to a public meeting, adjoining property owners to a public meeting to provide them with a status update on the project. I don't have at my fingertips how much, we've spent to date on the engineering fees. So I finally figured out what Mr. Harold was talking about, engineers walking through the backyards. So as part of the project, we surveyed all the trees through the drainage way, knowing that the project limits, some of the project limits will be within that dedicated right-of-way open space, and some on private property, because the channel over the years has meander, doesn't necessarily care where the drainage easement is. So we're trying to limit the impacts on trees and evaluate what trees have to stay and what trees have to go. And as a result of that, we did do quite a bit of surveying, tagged trees, identified them. So there's a lot of work going on there, and that I believe is what the gentleman's referring to.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And also, just to bring current board members up to speed, when Dave Modricker is talking about going through and trying to preserve as many trees as possible, in the past, when the board discussed that project, that was one of the directions that we gave to staff to, while addressing the needs appropriately, to try to absolutely minimize any disturbance, recognizing the value of that canopy. So.
We have Dan Horner has a hand up again. I can bring him on if you'd like.
Okay.
And you're back on.
My bad.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Any further public comment? If seeing none, we will matriculate to back to board discussion. Lisa?
Thanks, Laura. I'll go ahead and go. I too want to thank everyone who's come tonight and who has stuck with this discussion. It's really a testament to public engagement, and I hope that that continues in other areas. It's really been good to see this level of citizen involvement. So I laid out a couple weeks ago my thoughts on this, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of aspects of that. Namely, the township today faces a different reality than when the idea of this fee was first presented. And 2 weeks ago, at the start of this public hearing, I asked my fellow board members to please consider what they believe should be the priorities of the township, given this new environment, with constraints on our economy that just could not even have been imagined 3 years ago when this process was started. I remain concerned that this fee is just not a good fit or a good solution for the township at this time. And one overarching concern I have is with the constraints this fee puts on this and future boards to meet challenges from the pandemic or other unknown situations in the future. Having this fee boxes this revenue in for one use, and it has no sunset provision as presented. To reiterate what I suggested at the last meeting, I suggest we vote no on this ordinance tonight, that we proceed with the stormwater activities planned in the budget for 2021, that we replicate that plan for 2022. That is assessing more of the township stormwater system with this expanded assessment that's been planned for this year, and conducting neighborhood realignment projects and funding this out of the general fund. then during the CIP and budget discussions for 2023, the board can review the progress of the assessments and the projects that have been indicated. The board and the staff will then have evidence, data on what's needed in terms of repairs and actual costs. The board will also have an accurate assessment of tax revenue during and hopefully by then following the pandemic, and we'll know what's needed or not in terms of additional dedicated funds. Finally, I've heard it been suggested that not imposing the fee at this time would be a waste of all the time and effort and expense that's gone into this study, and I don't see it that way. I think that setting this fee to the side for the time being shows a board and a public and a staff that is responding to a crisis and to change with agility and with caution and with sensitivity to the conditions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Other board members, this is our opportunity for discussion before calling for a motion. Prasenjit, was that a hand raise? Okay, yes, Prasenjit.
So my position is that I am, again, echoing the concerns raised by Ms. Strickland. I'm concerned about the effect of the pandemic on the incomes of our people in our community, and the projections that the economic downturn will perhaps last 2 or 3 years. So therefore, in general, however, having said that, I think a fee is a good policy because it provides an incentive to businesses and people to reduce the amount of paved surfaces and essentially reduce stormwater creation to the extent possible. And with the climate change that is happening and the huge storms and so on, and you see that right now, even in the American South, Southwest, and entire South perhaps, there will be spikes in the amount of rainfall that we have and the amount of snow that we have, which would create a stress on our stormwater infrastructure. And perhaps there is a need to fix that. And hopefully we can also undertake projects that reduces the stormwater in a public-private partnership where businesses do their part, being incentivized or disincentivized by a stormwater fee. So in general, I am in favor of a stormwater fee, but not at this point. And my preference would be, as I have said from the beginning, ideally to make it as much revenue neutral as possible, as in couple this with a reduction in the income tax, which we have the highest in the area, and at least offset that increased revenue to some extent. So these are the pros and cons in my mind. I am heartened with the board coming together to protect the people who have the lowest income, and to protect nonprofits which have the lowest income or revenues, whatever the right term is, and the credits that are the policy that are there with respect to which would encourage more environmentally friendly building. So given these pluses and minuses, I am at this point, I'm leaning against the fee, but I'll listen to everyone and then make a final decision.
Thank you, Prasenjit. Patty, would you care to comment?
I really don't have anything to add that hasn't already been said by everybody already. Because I just heard Prasenjit, I actually totally agree with everything he said. And I have been wavering as I talked to Lisa. I've been wavering back and forth the whole time. But at this point, I'm leaning in favor of the fee, as I feel like storm events are becoming more of a thing, realizing that most of our corrugated metal pipes are at their life or beyond their life, and we're just, so I'm ready to move forward with what is something that I think we absolutely need.
Thank you very much, Patty. I'll go ahead and also comment. So in terms of other solutions versus this fee, I've heard a lot of folks say that other things have not been explored and weren't discussed or weren't talked about, or that the board just didn't understand what we were doing. But I want to assure everyone that this was not something that the previous board just embarked on flippantly. And it was in the face of seeing a pattern of very important projects be pushed off by many, many boards over the years. And as both Prasenjit and Patty have mentioned, a concern for what that meant in terms of the future and continued climate change. For whatever reason, I don't know, my husband does math and talks about things being sexy or not sexy. Stormwater just isn't one of those kinds of projects that has that kind of appeal, perhaps, but is extremely essential and has been deprioritized over the years. Ferguson Township holds the majority of the water for the region. If you look at the maps of the watershed and the groundwater, we are all blue. I don't know where a low point, that's where it is. So we have really a special place in the region to try to really do all we can to protect the integrity of that water and the quality of that water. And as with the climate change action, plan, we have a responsibility to engage our residents in partnership with doing those things. And when we discussed the option of a property tax or an income tax increase, it really just did not seem to be a fair method to approach increased revenue for this problem. I would agree with Prasenjit in terms of being revenue neutral, except for that the goal of this is to raise more revenue because we need more revenue to address unaddressed issues. It's pretty disheartening to me to hear the public and even more so other board members speak of the board doing this just because we initiated the contract with a consultant to help us understand what this fee would look like if it was possible here, and some of the parameters of it. I don't know how many times I've tried to set this record straight, but I'll definitely do it again here. Many times municipalities engage consultants to explore an issue and don't necessarily move forward with the solution that the consultant has provided. Until we vote, we don't know if we are moving forward with that solution that has been modified by greatly and to and very much improved upon the solution by the public's input. But if this board does move forward with this fee, it is not because one time years ago, a previous board initiated this contract with this consultant. It is because the result of the deliberations and the changes in the ordinance and the supporting resolutions have resulted in something that we feel is beneficial to the township, period. And so I really want to clarify that tonight. I think that's all I have to say. I personally feel, I'm sorry, go ahead, Patty.
No, I just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, is that I think that's the appeal of the fee to me, as opposed to a tax increase, in that much like the way the community has really challenged and engaged us on this issue, the fees I think they'll stay that way, and the ability of the fee to be manipulated as opposed to a property tax, which is just one and done. I hope that continues with the community engagement and involvement with it.
Thank you, Patty, because you jogged my memory that there was something else that I wanted to address. Several things in terms of the hardship that we are facing as a community, nation, and a world right now, the pandemic and its effect on our deliberations and what we have as a final product and timeline for potentially moving forward with this fee. So whether there's a pandemic or not, we have resolutions that support a hardship exemption for individuals and for nonprofits. That's something that would be relevant during a pandemic or not during a pandemic. If we move forward with this today and individuals are still being impacted in terms of their income, 2 years from now, that hardship policy is something that they can put to good use and be exempted from this fee. I think that had it not been a pandemic, we may not have necessarily gone down that path as far as we did. And I think really continuing our deliberations at this time has made it a better ordinance and supporting resolutions, because I know that the board supports that kind of thing generally. I guess that's all I have to say. I think that I'm acknowledging that it's a difficult time. And I think that in the documents that we've presented tonight, we've also acknowledged that it's a difficult time, and we've provided exemptions for those that are feeling the greatest impact of that time. Thanks. Yes, Steve.
Well, at this point, I'd like to make a motion that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance establishing utility fee for stormwater collection management.
This is Patty, I'll second.
And new chair here, I have not yet closed the public hearing. So previous chair, can we move forward with discussion of the motion and a vote? And then I can, okay, all right.
We can close the vote. A vote will close the public hearing.
So. Okay, and I don't have to formally do so then. Okay, thank you for that that moment. Okay, so
Long time to
any,
figure that out.
thank you. Any further discussion on the motion?
I just want to say that I've, pretty much, I think I've said everything that, leading up to this, and I think.
Sorry, Steve, you're fading out a little bit.
Oh, let me adjust this a little. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I want to emphasize that the board is aware of the impact on community members, and we are community members who will be affected by this if it passes. So those things have been taken into account. We're not rushing into anything. We actually came close to putting it on the agenda over about a year and a half ago, but at that time we had 3 appointed members on the board who hadn't been elected, and we decided that it was not appropriate to address something of this impact with that situation. And I do believe that the discussions we've had in the year and a half since then have improved it quite a bit. And so that's why I make a motion now, is I think it is at a point where we should vote on it.
Thanks, Steve. I'll agree that we, yes, we did. We slowed down the process because we had 3 appointed members and really wanted the board to be at least majority elected prior to continuing that process. And I'll also agree that this public engagement and comment time has been absolutely invaluable in terms of improving on this ordinance and the supporting resolutions that go along with it. Lastly, I had forgotten to say, in terms of hardship and in terms of COVID, I think there still remains some confusion about the relationship between enactment of the fee and the capital improvement program and the annual fee setting. So if it turns out that COVID isn't going away, there's worse strains, the vaccine is ineffective, we're in an economic downslide that we can't pull out of, that budget can still be decreased, and the funding can still be decreased, and projects can be pushed further out in the SIP, just like we've done year after year after year, resulting in the difficulty that we're facing now. We can continue upon that path. If you recall, we also added in the cap on the fund, right? And so we still have control over that. And we are not going to break the bank, so to speak, if this crisis were to continue. This board has the ability to change course on that within the context of the fee. And you can re-engage with us and advocate for that if we don't see that ourselves. So I think that's something that's really, really important to point out. And I know some don't trust that there could be a decrease of that fee. I don't know how to build that bridge of trust other than to move forward and prove it. So, any other dialogue or comments? Prasenjit.
Piggybacking on those lines. So my understanding is correct. The rate is set is set every year by the Board of Supervisors based on the projects that we will do every year. And the community has the opportunity to make their opinion heard through whatever means, and plus the elections and so on. So
yes, correct. All right. Barring any further discussion, going once, Going twice. Okay, I'll call for a vote. Dave, if you would, do the honors of roll call vote.
Sure. This is presented as ordinance number 1066. Ms. Danini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
No.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion passes 3-2. And we will move on to the next public hearing of the evening. A continued public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a credit policy manual for the stormwater management utility fee as described in Exhibit A and attached hereto. Dave, if you would.
I'm going to ask Dave Modricker to introduce the credit policy manual resolution.
Thank you.
So the credit policy is in your packet. The resolution's been discussed numerous times over many meetings. The only change since your last review of this document at the last meeting, which was a public hearing, excuse me, was the addition of one credit defined as structural BMP rate control. So that would be on page 9, let's see, of the actual page number in the document, it's page 6. So it probably depends what document you have in front of you, but page 6 of the document, table 1. And I can share my screen if that's helpful. So here is a table 1 excerpt of the credit manual. Here is a line item, structural BMP for rate control, applies to residential and applies to all non-residential, 10%. If we go down and look at the narrative, excuse my scrolling, demonstrate the ability to limit post-development runoff rates to pre-development runoff rates, must have a recorded BMP, best management practice, operation and maintenance plan, and easement agreement allowing the township to inspect it. So, and I'll stop sharing. I believe the intent all along was to have that. Upon review, we realized that we did not. What this does is acknowledges a credit for some of the older stormwater basins in the township, because at the time, those ordinances regulated the rate of runoff, not necessarily volume or water quality. So they had volume to contain water, but the premise of the design was to control the rate. And so what this addition does is simply acknowledges that and allows for a credit for some of those older basins. During our last discussion and my review of the table, and then further review with the township engineer, it was that particular discussion about how does this apply to some of the older basins that I really got to looking and realized that we were missing that element of rate control. So other than that, the credit manual is as presented. It's not perfect. I'm sure as time goes on, we will refine it, but it's certainly a great place to start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Modricker. This is a public hearing, and so I would like to open up the floor to folks that would like to comment on this. And
Once
just
again, I placed the link in the chat for attendees if you wish to sign up, or alternatively, we can use the raise hand feature. Please do not, and I do have one person sign up, please do not use the chat to provide your questions and comments. The chat's not being monitored, so you won't get a response or an acknowledgement. I have Mark Kunkel to sign, who signed up then.
great, Mr. Kunkel.
Mark, you're in.
There we go.
Yep.
Thank you very much for this evening. I have just a couple questions with regard to the credit manual that maybe you can clarify. The credit manual provides that downspouts that are sumped are they presumed that they're already sumped? These are already residential properties that homes have been built and the downspouts have been sumped. Are those presumed to meet the township standards, or does the property owner have to engage an engineer to have some type of functional verification and certification?
I'm going to actually ask for staff to please respond to that, since it's kind of a technical question. We should work that detail out.
Yeah, I think there's a presumption that the downspout was designed to proper and constructed to proper standards, whether it's pre-existing or if it's something that the homeowner plans to do. So, you know, some of the developments that were approved had designs for downspouts. I think it would have to be, you know, a type of self-certification, because there's a lot of property owners that are going to move into a home that aren't the original builder and really have no idea if how the downspout was constructed. So there's a presumption that if it's built to a stump, it meets certain criteria. Any documentation that can be provided would be helpful, but I don't think it's going to be required.
Right. Generally, if I may, just to add to that, the entirety of the credit policy manual is, essentially a self-certification, with the township doing periodic spot checks or compliance measures to make sure, kind of on a periodic basis, that those that have invoked credits qualify for that.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. The other question, I guess, following that is, it seems to read that the credit manual is going to require a maintenance agreement for those sump downspouts. Is that a misinterpretation on my part?
I don't know that we had intended that there be a maintenance agreement for the sumped downspouts, but I'll have to probably review that a little bit more. Obviously, the structural BMPs, the basins, the larger features, those are the ones that need O&M and easements. I don't really think we were expecting it to pertain to downspouts. However, if we get complaints or follow-ups on inspections that downspouts, aren't sumped or aren't working, those deficiencies would have to be corrected.
Okay. Yeah, my last question is, if my recollection is correct, the prior stormwater utility fee ordinance had provisions in it for MS4 permit holders to have a 40% credit. I don't know if that was removed from the ordinance or if that was a misunderstanding on my part, but it appears to me, though, that now Penn State, which is now an MS4 permit holder, their credit has been increased from 40% to 50%, while all other property owners have a maximum of 40% credit. Can you clarify that?
It has moved from 40 to 50 to 40. So actually, I'll let Dave P. clarify.
And the 40 is correct. It should be 40%. If that's not what's reflected in the in the policy manual, then we could. I have to pull it up right in front of me, but if it still shows 50, then we'll make the change prior to considering the resolution. But 40% is what the board talked about at the February 1st meeting as being the cap on the credit eligible for an MS4 permittee.
Okay.
So yeah, that needs to be changed then.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kunkel.
So perhaps in light of that, or prior to the motion, if there's a motion introduced to enact the resolution, there may be a motion to amend that policy manual to reflect the 40% maximum for MS4 permit holders.
Sounds good. For now, we'll continue with any public comment if there's any more.
Nobody signed up. And no hand raised and nobody signed up. Oh, there is one here. I just see coming through.
Okay.
Jared Amico. I'll bring Jared on here. Okay. Or Nico, I'm sorry.
You're on, Mr. Nico.
My name is Jared Ernico. and I live in Overlook Heights. I'm sorry, I just came on. If you could just confirm, we are talking about the stormwater fee at this point.
This is a public hearing on the resolution for the credit policy manual.
Okay.
Stormwater fees. So any comments or questions relative to the credits?
Yep. And we did already have the discussion on the ordinance itself. There'd be no harm if you wanted to make a comment. You're more than welcome to.
Okay. Well, my simple comment is that I do oppose the fee. I'm not opposed to stormwater management. I highly support that. Living on West Aaron Drive, I really would like to see some stormwater management on my road. Right now, my driveway is suffering. My garage has settled as a result of water that's run down in between the houses. And I just don't know that I trust that the money that's going to go into this is actually going to go towards fixing issues that are happening on my street. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm in opposition of the fee at this point, because really I haven't heard anything that specifies projects that are going to be handled. And that's really what I would like to see, is to know what the future of this money is for. Really, all I've heard at this point is things that are going to go towards maintenance, just general maintenance. And so that's really where my opposition comes from. So once again, I live in Overlook Heights, and those are my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Ernico. And then we'll resume public comment specifically for the credit policy. If there's any more. No? Okay. All right. This time I'm gonna close the public hearing now, and we'll move on to board discussion. Any board discussion on the policy manual? Credit policy manual. Lisa.
My only comment really had been the one that was already addressed about the MS4 at 50% and changing that to 40. But I was wondering, given some of the questions we've had and Dave Modricker's comments, if you could just speak a little bit to the process of updating and changing this manual, how easy that will be, how often that can be done, and just to give everyone kind of an overview of that process.
Sure. As we work through it and use it, refine it, have suggested changes to it, we'll mark it up, bring it before the board at a regular meeting, ask you if you want to, well, Dave could probably describe the process better than me, but it'd be a resolution. So a public hearing for a resolution, and we would just revise it as we do resolutions for street tree standards or, anything else, or road standards, anything that's adopted by resolution.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, we wouldn't make changes unilaterally, at staff level. We would gain some experience, mark it up, bring a draft in front of you, make suggested changes, and then pending your approval and a public hearing, it would get adopted.
Thanks. I'm sure I speak for the whole board when I say that we really want this to be a responsive document. So as you're getting feedback, we definitely want to hear, about that feedback and how we can improve upon it.
Yeah, and I sense that, and when we talk to homeowner association groups about this, and how do credits apply to them, to the whole. I've really said that I believe that the board wants staff to be as flexible as we can in offering the credits, and so that'll be our approach.
Thank you. Other board discussion? We can also take a motion to amend the, Steve, is that what you're going to do?
I was going to make a motion on the resolution and then we can make a motion.
Oh, right. Thank you.
So I would like to make a motion, the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing credit policy manual for the Ferguson Township stormwater management and utility fee.
Thanks, Steve. I'm sorry, you're fading out. I'm not sure what's going on with your audio. It typically will start kind of like normal and then kind of fade out.
I think if you lean into the laptop, it picks it up a lot better, Steve.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was going through my headset, but it must be going through the laptop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, I'll repeat that I was making a motion that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing a credit policy manual for the Ferguson Township stormwater management utility fee.
I'll second that.
Closer, but not quite. Thank you. Okay, so the motion is in our agenda and it is to adopt the stormwater management credit policy manual. So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion on the motion or second? I'm on the motion. Okay, and Steve, I did not hear. Did you wrap into your motion the change? Okay, all right. So,
are you hearing me any better now?
Yeah.
Now I am.
Okay, I just switched speaker or microphones, so hopefully.
Okay, great.
The motion was just as presented in the.
As presented.
agenda.
Okay. All right. So then we'd like to amend that motion. I'll take an amendment to the motion. I could make the amendment to the motion to amend the manual to set the credit maximum for MS4 permit holders at 40%.
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Patty. All right. Any discussion on the amendment? All right. I'll take a vote on the amendment to the motion. And this is a voice vote only, right? Okay. All in favor of the amendment to the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign.
Aye.
That amendment passes 4-1. Any further discussion on the motion itself? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask Dave to take a roll call vote.
Thank you. This is presented as resolution number 2021-05. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Ms. Denini?
Yes. All right. Next item is a continued public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a partial exemption for agricultural properties from the Ferguson Township Stormwater Management Utility Fee. Mr. Probalka.
Thank you. So provided with your agenda is a copy of the resolution that's been advertised this evening for public hearing. As Ms. Denini pointed out, it establishes both a partial, establishes a partial exemption for certain qualified agricultural properties, meaning those that meet the definition of agricultural use as defined in the Pennsylvania Farmland and Forest Land Protection Act of 1974, commonly known as Pennsylvania Clean and Green. The only change that was added to the resolution from the public hearing that took place on February 1st was to add a provision that reflected the February 1st discussion, allowing the fees assessed to agricultural properties that qualify to be further reduced through the establishment or the invocation of qualified credits on the property.
Okay, thank you, Dave. This is a public hearing, so we will go to public comment first.
Once again, I'll post the link in the chat. Remind people, please, to not provide comments in the chat or questions. And if you wish to comment or ask questions, you can sign up there, or you can use the raise hand feature. When acknowledged by the chair, I'll enable you to speak.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
I'm not seeing any hands or anybody sign in the.
All right. We'll move to board discussion. Does anyone care to comment? Okay. We have discussed this thoroughly multiple times. Okay. I'll ask for a motion.
I'll give it a try and see if my microphone's working.
Okay.
I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing a partial exemption for the agricultural properties from the Ferguson Township Stormwater Management Utility Fee.
Okay, Steve's moved. Do we have a second?
This is Patty. I'll second.
All right. Any discussion? All right, seeing none. Dave, I'll ask you to do a roll call vote.
This is presented as resolution number 2021-06. Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Denini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Next item is a continued public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing an exemption policy for certain economic hardships as described in Exhibit A.
Thank you. So once again, provided with your agenda is a copy of the resolution that's been advertised for the continued public hearing and action this evening, establishing both a full and partial exemption process for certain qualified individuals and families who are experiencing economic hardship. This policy is unchanged from the draft that was reviewed by the board on February 1st. And as provided for in the policy, individuals and families whose income is less than or equal to 200% of the federal income, poverty income level could qualify for a full exemption from the stormwater management utility fee. And those individuals whose income is between 200 and 250% of the federal poverty income level could qualify for a 50% exemption from the stormwater utility fee.
Thank you, Dave. And let's move to public comment on this item.
The link in the chat is still correct. And I do have one hand up here, Mr. Keogh, if you want to bring him on.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bill, you're on.
You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Hello.
I just have one kind of inquiry with regard to this particular exemption. The only people who will be affected by the fee are the property owners of record in the township. Isn't that correct?
By property owners of record, you mean the property owners themselves and not any tenants or renters. That's correct.
Well, yeah, and at least we're just billing the property owners.
That's right.
We're not billing tenants or anything like that. Do we have any sense from any database how many property owners in Ferguson Township meet the guideline that is established in this fee exemption policy?
Property owner data, no. We have data that pertains to the that comes from census and American Citizen Survey data that describes the numbers of households living at or below the poverty level, but it doesn't get into the specificity of who's tenants versus property owners, et cetera.
I guess that's where I'm kind of fuzzy with regard to how many actual citizens of Ferguson Township this particular exemption will apply to. Not from a negative point of view, but just from a reality point of view, recognizing the general income of the residents in the township, recognizing the housing types that we have in the township and all of those kinds of things, and then looking at the definition that we're using for the hardship. I'm finding it tough to match a number with the definition that we're applying. And I'm wondering if we ought to look at a different definition, one which certainly would recognize economic hardship, but not to the level of what is proposed in the standard that you're using. I just pose that as a question because I've not heard anybody, comment on how many people this would affect and whether it would in fact do the job that we hope it will do for those people who are in fact truly having an economic hardship. So that's all I have for comment.
Bill, before you go, Bill, could you provide clarification by an example of what this alternative definition would be for us?
Well, I think there are a number of definitions of financial capability out there in the world. I don't know of which one would be the best, but certainly in the housing field, there are definitions of people who qualify for all kinds of special treatment in housing and rent rebate and rent subsidy and all of those kinds of things. And though I don't know as any of them or if all of them are linked to the definition that we're using or proposing to use in this particular ordinance. I'm just concerned that we get a reference point of hardship that we're feeling good about in terms of meeting the need of the population who own homes in Ferguson Township. That's all.
Thank you, Bill. Do we have any other public comment, Dave?
Nobody on the sign-in sheet, and I don't see any further hands up in the list of attendees.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and move to board discussion. Do we have any board comments or discussion? Lisa?
I guess I'll just say, kind of in response to that last comment, we had comments at the first part of this public hearing 2 weeks ago on the impact on renters. And so again, just as with the credit manual, I would assume that we can go back in and adjust this as needed and as we see improvements that can be made. So that's all I would suggest at this point.
Thank you, Lisa. I completely agree with that willingness to go back in and improve. We'll say, I think we did have, if this is kind of what Bill's getting at, I think we did have, I know we did have some discussion in terms of potential effect on renters and, the passing on of costs of property owners and how really that was not something that we were going to be able to disentangle, and that if we were to go to a different route of raising revenue, so through income tax increase or property tax increase, there would still be the potential effect of property owners passing on those costs, and the negative effect of income tax increase on that demographic, where we wouldn't really be able to offer exemptions. So, other than that, I am not sure. I've typically seen this kind of framework applied in housing situations and that kind of assessment using those metrics. So I personally can't really think of anything else that we could possibly explore that would be a better metric to use.
Right.
I
I'm sorry.
I just seem to recall too that we used this based on, I could be wrong, but I thought it was Montgomery County, Maryland, and some other places. And then we just adjusted it based on the cost of living here in State College. But there was a method to it that we worked through with in drafting that, but I could be wrong. My memory is a little fuzzy on that. But I like it that it is a document, as you both alluded to, that we can go back to and tweak if we need to.
And you know, I would just add, I mean, to your points, which I think are exactly correct, and you know, Mr. Keogh's comment is a good one too. It is a challenge. It's just one that we don't have, you know, much control over. You know, there's really no barometer, or I should say, there's really no you know, means of the township to ensure that for those properties that are tenant occupied or the rental housing, that any discount that's afforded to the property owner will be passed down or passed along to their tenants. And that's a challenge to this resolution. The question for the board is, you know, is this something better than nothing, I guess, you know, for lack of a better way to describe it. And you know, this would impact, you know, certainly the more impoverished property owners. This would give them a way to, you know, capitalize on an exemption from this fee, either full or partial. But there is kind of a donut hole, so to speak, to Bill's point, that applies to the tenants. And, you know, there's no metric that, you know, we could really examine that would address that concern. And, you know, that would be short of providing an exemption to the property owner. And, you know, again, we keep kind of running into that obstacle of, if we provide the exemption to the landlord or the property owner, how can we ensure that reduction or that exemption is passed along to the tenant? And of course, as we all know here, there are other factors in town that drive the costs of rental housing. And so it would even be difficult to say that if we could do that it would have a meaningful impact on rental housing prices beyond what the fees assessed, because your price points are going to raise and fall with other market interests.
Yes, I agree, Dave. Thanks for that synopsis. Okay, if there's no further board discussion, I'll take a motion.
I present it, move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing an economic hardship exemption from the Ferguson Township Stormwater Management Utility Fee.
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Dave, I will ask for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. This is presented as Resolution 2021-07. Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Ms. Danini?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Next, we'll move on to a continued public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a maximum fund balance permitted to accrue in Fund 20 Stormwater.
Provided with your agenda this evening is a copy of the resolution that's been advertised for the continuance of the public hearing. An action establishing a maximum fund balance permitted to accrue in Fund 20, or the Township's Stormwater Fund. Resolution limits the allowable fund balance in Fund 20 to 30% of the budgeted expenditures in the fiscal year. By enacting the resolution, the board intends to stabilize the fee assessed by setting the allowable reserve that can accrue year to year. The board projects a fund balance that's in excess of 30%. Per the resolution, the board could either apply that excess to a one-time expenditure related to stormwater management, or reduce the stormwater fee to lower the fund balance to less than or equal to 30% in accordance with the policy guidelines.
Thank you, Dave. And let's move to public comment.
I don't see any Anybody signed in on the form or raised hand in the attendee list?
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and close that public hearing and open up board discussion. Anyone? In lieu of discussion, I'll take a motion.
I presented move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing a maximum fund balance permitted to accrue in Fund 20 stormwater.
This is Patty. I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? I'll just add that, like many of the other resolutions that are supporting the ordinance, this came about through public input, and I think it's valuable, and it's an important part of how this ordinance will work. So, all right, seeing no discussion, Dave, I'll ask you to do a roll call vote.
Thank you. This is presented as Resolution 2021-08. Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Danini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens.
Yes.
We're about to move into new business. Is everybody doing okay, or does anyone want to recess? Okay. Looks like everybody's doing okay. So first item of business under new business is our consent agenda. I'll add one item on the consent agenda is our letter asking the Department of Health to address the issues with vaccine access, and they have done, an order that should address that, and it's really up to us if we want to send that letter anyway, or if we don't want to send the letter. So I guess I might ask to pull that off the consent agenda before we have a motion to approve, so we can discuss that.
And I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda, with the exception of item C.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
I'll present it second.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Okay, great, thank you. Next item of business is a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, authorizing the township manager to execute an adoption agreement for the 457B deferred compensation plan for government employers.
Thank you. And these next two items are generally the same, but they pertain to different pension plans for the non-uniformed employees of Ferguson Township, one being the 457B deferred compensation plan, and the next being the 401A defined contribution plan. The board may recall that last year, a non-uniform pension advisory committee was convened of township employees, and they voted to transition the township's non-uniform pension investments from ICMA-RC as administrator of the plan to Voya. And the consulting firm Cornerstone Wealth Advisors was engaged to assist with this transition. The board formally approved the change late last year, and provided with the agenda this evening is an adoption agreement that has to be executed in order for that plan to be established with Voya. There's a couple of items that are appended to the resolution. The first being the actual adoption agreement that describes all of the plan, the components of the plan, who can participate, what the regulations are, what the retirement provisions are, et cetera. And then there's also Exhibit B, which is the basic plan document, which has a lot of the details about the available investments, et cetera. So there's a recommended motion in your packet, and staff is recommending that the board adopt the resolution.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And this is a public hearing. So if there's anyone in the public that would like to comment on this, please do raise your hand. All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution authorizing the township manager to execute an adoption agreement for the 457B deferred compensation plan for government employers.
I'll second. Steve?
Any discussion?
So I just have a question, and maybe I forgot this, but can you just briefly tell us what the advantage of moving is?
Sure. Briefly. Oh. Yes, I will try to keep it brief. I'll try to keep the elevator pitch as concise as I can. And it's a good question. And there's a number of components that were considered with the recommendation to make the transition. But really what it amounted to was evaluating the fund lineups that were available to plan participants, employees, and retired employees as well, that were offered with ICMA-RC, looking at their performance over the last number of years, three-year performance period, 5-year, 10-year, et cetera, and their different metrics associated with the plan, assets under management, the ability to beat their benchmarks or their index funds. And really, with the assistance of Pat Geary of Cornerstone Wealth Advisors, and a non-proprietary or a third-party, I guess, evaluation tool that they use that's common to the industry, the results weren't very good. And I'm saying that on behalf of the Non-Uniform Pension Advisory Committee, meaning many of the funds, a majority of the funds, were underperforming comparatively speaking with their market benchmarks. Some were doing better than others, but on the whole, they were just about all underperforming. And even the ones that were performing better than their benchmarks weren't performing as well as they ought to have been, given the market trends and how things were going for similar funds that had similar asset classes and investments, et cetera. So that was our first step as a non-uniform pension advisory committee, or as the advisory committee, was to look at the performance of our existing fund lineup. After we looked at that, the next step was for the committee to decide whether we wanted to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that we pursue via request for proposals alternative plan or other plan administrators other than ICMA-RC. The board elected or voted to move on with that next step. So we issued this request for proposals. We had about 8 respondents, 8 qualified firms, including ICMA-RC, and they gave us their recommended fund lineups. We tried to match as best we could investment and as well as we could investment options, meaning if you were an employee with the township that was maybe early on in his or her career, and you were willing to be more risk tolerant with your investments, we wanted to offer asset classes that reflected that. If you were later in your career, maybe a public works director who may see the horizon, the retirement on the horizon, and you may not want to be quite as risky with your investments in your retirement portfolio. We wanted to offer that more conservative lineup that was low risk, but maybe not quite as potential for reward. And ideally, we wanted to be able to give a whole menu of options in between low risk and high risk. And because these are defined contribution plans, as opposed to defined benefit plans like we find in our police department, it's really incumbent on the participant or the employee to decide which asset classes they want to invest in. But it's incumbent on me as chief administrator of the plan, you all as trustees of the plan, and the Non-Uniform Pension Advisory Committee as co-fiduciaries of the plan to offer the best lineup that we can to meet what used to be known as the prudent person rule. And I think there's a little bit of a different standard, but in that we're offering that, we're not saying that all your investments are going to win. We're not saying that, you're going to, make $1 million if you give us 20, but we want to be able to give you the best options that we can based on those different asset classes and risk tolerances so that you can, make informed decisions with your investments, and there's more to it, of course, providing the resources that employees can have access to help guide those making processes, because we're not all experts in this, or very few of us, if any, are experts in this. So, there was a number of different metrics against which we evaluated the respondents to our request for proposals. The non-uniform advisory committee met, reviewed the proposals. We had a thorough review process. We made a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to transition to Voya because they provided the best performing asset classes, the best performing fund lineup, the best access to those resources to help employees make informed decisions, the best fee structure, because that's the other component, is what fees are they charging, and not only what are they charging, but how transparent are those fees? How obvious is it to me as a participant in that plan what I'm paying for my retirement services? So we looked at metrics, kind of across the board, evaluated all 8 of those proposals, which led ultimately to our recommendation to make the transition. That was approved late last year, and here's the kind of next step of implementation. We've been working on implementation of the transition now for about 2 months with periodic meetings. Eric Anderson has been kind of leading the charge on that, working with Voya, working with Cornerstone. And, after we get these documents approved and executed, that's when we'll begin to move the investments to the new administrator and work on employee engagement and education, et cetera. Eric, I don't know, do you have did I miss anything or?
No, the cost structure, you mentioned that later on.
Right.
Also, I think Voya has a much better training format than ICMA does. There's a lot of, like you said, the matrix, and we looked at a number of different issues, not only returns, but also the cost. And Pat's been a great help with all that. And also the portfolio is much larger. We can pretty much pick and choose whatever funds lineup that we want, as opposed to what ICMA was offering.
Thank you.
Good question, good answer. Okay, if there's no other discussion or questions, I'll ask Dave to please take a roll call vote.
Thank you. This is presented as Resolution 2021-09. Ms. Danini?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Next, we'll move on to a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, authorizing the township manager to execute an adoption agreement for the 401A defined contribution plan for government employers. Dave?
I'm just going to kind of cover this with a ditto, if I may. It's largely the same. There's some components in the adoption agreement that are a little different. The one that I would call out is really the structure of the plan is this is the plan that's purely employer funded. So this is what the township provides. We provide a 10% match into the plan if employees provide the minimum 3% investment into the 457B, which is what we just discussed, which is the employee funded plan. So this is the employer funded defined contribution plan. And so, structurally, the documents are the same. There's some nuances that are different between the 401 and the 457 that Eric or I can answer any specific questions about.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And this is a public hearing, so let's open it up to any public comment. Okay. Seeing no yellow hands, I'll take a motion.
I present it, move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution authorizing the township manager to execute an adoption agreement for a 401A defined contribution plan for government employers.
This is Patty, I'll second.
You? Any discussion? All right. Seeing none, Dave, could you take a roll call vote?
This is presented as Resolution 2021-10. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Denini.
Yes. All right, moving on to zoning appeals and requests for variances. Request for variance 3795 West College Avenue.
Thank you. So this is a request for the State College Borough Water Authority for several variants, or for variance from the floodplain conservation regulations and a few provisions that are identified therein. This is in conjunction with the bridge replacement project that PennDOT has been working on, and that's in conjunction with the realignment of the intersection of Shingletown and West College Avenue. There's a need for the Water Authority to relocate one of their existing 12-inch water mains, and that's going to cut through, that relocation will impact wetlands in the main channel of Slab Cabin Run. Commonly, the board has taken positions of opposition to floodplain encroachments because this is not a structural impact, meaning it's not going to raise the base flood elevations of those floodplains. Staff is recommending that the board remain neutral on this request.
Thank you, Dave. Let's start with the motion, please.
Supervisors remain neutral in the request for variance at 3795 West College Avenue.
Do we have a second?
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. I think this is just a voice vote. Yes. All right. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. All right. Motion passes unanimously. Next, the award of contract 2021-C23 traffic signal pole replacement. Would this go to Mr. Modricker?
It certainly could.
Please.
Bids were open publicly for contract 2021 C23, contract for traffic signal pole replacement at the intersection of West College Avenue and Science Park Road on Tuesday, February 9th. It was a remote Microsoft Teams opening, advertised that way. The bid opening was attended by a representative of M&B Services, LLC, and Kaharchik Construction, as well as township staff. The bid was advertised in the Center Daily Times, and invitations were sent to qualified bidders. The pole is being replaced because of a vehicular crash that occurred on December 7th of 2020. Cost of the pole replacement to be covered by insurance. 2 bids were received. M&B Services in the amount of $46,020.71. Kaharchik in the amount of $49,404.80. I recommend the Board of Supervisors award the contract to M&B Services, LLC in the amount of $46,020.71.
Thank you very much. And let's start with a motion, please.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors award contract.
I move that the Board of Supervisors award contract 2021-C23 traffic signal pole replacement to the low bidder M&B Services in accordance with their bid amount of $46,020.71.
You and second, please.
This is Patty. I'll second.
Yes, Steve, you're only allowed to second from here on out.
Got it.
All right. Is there any discussion on this? All right. And we'll call for a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Let's circle back around to that item that was removed from the consent agenda. And that's just a matter of, would we like to send a letter Would we not like to send the letter? Would we like to modify the letter a little bit and send it? All up for discussion. Any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to know from people who are more knowledgeable and followed this and maybe did their homework, is how much of what we are asking has already been addressed. So if it's already redundant, then we don't send it. Otherwise, we should word it to only send, you know, the extra things that we want.
So I don't know if I qualify as more knowledgeable or not. My understanding was the order that came out of the Department of Health pretty much makes our letter unnecessary, but I'd like to hear other folks' perspective on that. So we were concerned about, you know, vulnerable populations' inability to sign up for the vaccinations with the, you know, web-based, not just it being web-based, but the specific difficulties entrenched in that particular web-based offering. And now this order mandates that along with that online sign up, even if that doesn't change at all, there has to be a telephone registration system. So individuals can call directly in and sign up and get their place in line for a vaccination. That's my understanding of the order. And
yeah, that was my reading too. And if that's the case, we just might, I'm leaning towards pulling it, but I'm ready to hear what Lisa has to say. Others.
That was my reading of the order also. And I think that addresses part of what we wanted to address and maybe what Public Safety Committee at COG had wanted to address. But I think the comments we had heard before were more regarding the confusion in the different providers and knowing the timeline and the process for signing up. So I think it's really good that anyone with a web-based sign up now has to have a phone number. I think that the potential for having people sign up in multiple locations still exists, and having trouble finding out where there are appointments available. You know, I think that still exists, but you know, that's kind of my understanding of it, but I'm not an expert by any means either. So I think probably one portion was addressed, but maybe not the overall concern about providing some clear direction among providers.
so I guess one way that we could modify the letter to send it is to focus on the centralized system aspect as opposed to the phone ease of access aspect. And I would certainly support doing something like that. We could even add in a thank you for addressing this other concern kind of thing. I am kind of maxed out on letter writing. And so if Lisa would take the lead on that modification, okay. If others are open to, you know, moving forward that with a slightly modified letter in those manners, I'd be happy to support that. Okay, sounds good. And Dave, okay, process question. So it's on the consent agenda. We pulled it, we modified it. Does this need to come back to us on a consent agenda, or can we just, you know, email the draft to the board and send?
My response, and I'll always defer parliamentary procedural questions to Mr. Miller, but would be that I think we could, as long as, you know, the board is comfortable with the, you know, with charging either Ms. Strickland or another board member or staff member with, you know, with drafting it with those parameters in it, then I think you can make the motion right now, you know, to authorize the, you know, submission of the letter reflecting those changes. Ms. Strickland drafts it up, Ms. Denny signs it, or whomever, and then you could send it right on. But if you would prefer, if you'd be more comfortable with seeing a draft, then we'd want to bring it back for a March 1st review and ultimate vote. So I think you could go either way, depending on what your, level of comfort is, I guess, with trusting a board member or a staff member with drafting the changes.
Okay, Steve, procedural guru, is Dave correct?
I think so. I think if we just make a motion authorizing Lisa to draft the letter and Laura to sign it as chair.
Great. I'm Steve, you're fading out again. I, Laura, move that we, as a board, authorize Lisa to make said changes to the letter and it be ready to send to the Department of Health and any other relevant parties.
This is Patty, I'll second.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign? All right, great. Can we hang on through reports or do we need Rick?
Fine.
All right, let's go with the reports. First up, COG committee reports. First up, Facilities Committee, Patty.
All right, let's see. We met and we saw a video on the COG renovation, their new suite, which was lovely and has all sorts of security measures in place, etc. There is an HVAC assessment going on for COG buildings, and that should be done by mid-March. Sorry.
Okay.
They're also updating the Park Forest pool assessment, and that should be done by mid-March as well. And let's see, they're finishing getting screens on the COG building. The Millbrook Marsh boardwalk continues. They're looking at the different surfaces, and DEP is involved because the footer is being buried into the ground. The COG building ownership, that meeting hadn't occurred as of the last facilities meeting. We briefly discussed the Whitehall Road Park project. The bids are complete and they're going to be asking for an extension on that, on the bids that came in for another 45 days. And the new facilities coordinator has set up a file in which all of our reports, assessments, etc., will all be sort of in a centralized file that the committee can access at any time. And that's all I have.
Nice. Thank you, Patty. Any questions for Patty and the Facilities Committee? And I can't see anybody's faces right now. Okay, there you all are. Any questions? All right. Seeing none, let's move on to the joint PSNE and TLU committee meeting. Lisa. Or I guess Prasenjit. Lisa and Prasenjit.
Yeah, we both attended that. So I don't know if Prasenjit, you want to?
Yeah, I guess the bottom line for me was that we discussed a lot and then decided that these two committees should be merged together, and we should, both keep attending the same meeting and so on. And that's basically what ultimately came out, which seems a little, we possibly could do with only one person attending, but that might come up in the next meeting and then we'll reorganize things. So that's basically the upshot. Any other interesting details, Lisa? Yeah.
No, I think you got it. I think we just went over what both committees do. Basically, the climate committee is going to take the environmental out of public services and environmental, and the public services part will go to TLU. And yeah, I think we said this, we're going to have one more joint meeting, and then maybe one more, but maybe not. But we wanted to come back to our boards and get feedback if you all think that this is a good plan for these two committees, and if you all think that we should whittle down to one representative per township, per municipality to represent. So that's what, we had all pretty much thought some sharing of knowledge for the next meeting or two, and then agreeing on a single representative. I don't know how it is in the other municipalities, but like here, Prasenjit is on the climate committee, so it seems a natural step for him to, to take on that role. It seemed like there was a lot of crossover with the other municipalities. They had a lot of people on both TLU and PSNE, so I don't know how they'll, I don't know. But it made sense to me.
Yeah, and the proposed name is LUTI, Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure.
Great.
I'm glad it's not Looney.
The work in progress, Jim May kept saying. So we'll see about that name.
Nice. That sounds good. All right, next up is the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee.
Right, so I was there. Let me bring up the agenda and my notes. Yep, so we talked about a lot about the community survey that is going to be sent out. And oh, Laura was there too. Yeah. So we talked a lot about the community survey that was sent out. Laura mentioned that we want it to be statistically significant and the results, and sort of people wordsmithed the questions and exchanged some questions for others. So that's primarily what happened. And now this is going to be sent out, and then they are going to send out a mailer to everyone to take this survey. And I completed the survey. It took 10 minutes, 10 to 15, might be less for people who are faster. So that's what's going to be sent out. And then there was a discussion about Penn State and the school district to have a representative in the CAS committee. And I think Laura again mentioned and clarified that they will not be voting members. So yeah, that makes sense to me. That was number 2, and the others were small things. Yeah, those are.
Thanks, Prasenjit, and I appreciated your clarification on the statistical significance piece. You know far more than I do about that, and that was really helpful. And yeah, I'll just add that sometimes when Penn State's added to a committee at COG, they're a voting member. Sometimes they're not a voting member, kind of can't keep up with it. So just for clarity's sake, on this particular committee, both of those representatives are liaisons, and I think that's a really good idea, but I also don't think that they should have a vote over our tax base. So I think it's good to work together, but maintain our own control over those financial items. All right, any questions for Prasenjit? Okay, seeing none. Next, we move on to Public Safety Committee. I attended that meeting virtually on Tuesday, February 9th, started at 12:15 p.m. Our first order of business was to recognize 2 code staff members, Kathy Woods and Brian Samsel, for their care, diligence, and professional service. This recognition was based on a glowing email from a property owner that shared his recent experience with these staff members. It was really nice to hear. Next, we moved recommendations for the Center Region Building and Housing Code Board of Appeal appointments forward to the Executive Committee to be moved to General Forum this month so they can forward the nominations to the member municipalities for appointment. Next, based on a suggestion at the January meeting, we moved a request for a General Forum presentation to the Executive Committee. The presentation will be given by Andrew Reed of Penn State Department of Entomology on the topic of their local COVID wastewater research. During staff reports, we had a brief discussion on code statistics and the decrease in construction from last January as compared to this January. Mr. Schneider pointed to both the natural up and down cycle of construction and also the effects of COVID. For example, some construction projects paused and then did not resume. Some are kind of waiting to see how things play out. Some were delayed and are resuming at this point. The regional code permitting software project is now moving forward again, and we should be seeing more on that soon. As a reminder, when COVID hit, we were at the stage of going to do visits to other municipalities that use the software packages under consideration. This software will be shared with the municipalities, and the goal is to move the zoning and code permitting toward a more seamless and efficient process. Next, Steve Baer presented progress to meet goals of recently completed fire protection program study. I'll give a few examples found on the dashboard report, which is very helpful, and I'd recommend if anyone wants to follow along with the progress that they consult these reports. For example, there was a recommendation to develop an internal process to measure the metrics for improved staffing. The progress made is that there are now measures in place and a formal policy document on collection, ownership, and review. Another example, there was a recommendation to monitor alpha performance to the standard of cover. Progress made is they are now performing quarterly calculations and have included box numbers to summary reports. Mr. Baer then provided a review of the standard of cover quarterly report. This report is broken down by rural and suburban calls and includes parameters they must meet and an assessment of whether they were met. This includes average time to respond and average number of personnel to the calls. For example, there were 7 suburban responses to building fires and extrications, and they met their response goal 100% of the time. Their average time to respond was 5.52 minutes with an average response of 22 personnel. Lastly, Mr. Baer reviewed a white paper he wrote on statewide activity with the potential to impact the regional fire protection program. The paper is thorough and detailed, and I will hit just a few highlights. In January 2017, the Senate passed Resolution 6, which established a commission to study and make recommendations regarding the state of Pennsylvania Fire Service and emergency medical services. Mr. Baer writes, the ongoing situation is summed up by the very first paragraphs of the SR6 report, and that is, fire and EMS are in a crisis right now. Simply put, EMS is woefully lacking in funding, and the number of volunteer firefighters have fallen dramatically over the decades. Despite these stark facts, to date, the legislature has made very limited progress on the SR6 recommendations, and there are a number of recommendations Mr. Baer has highlighted, all of them having a direct effect on the funding of these services locally. I think this white paper is an essential read for those hoping to understand the crisis in fire and emergency medical services we currently face in local communities across Pennsylvania. Mr. Kaufman's emergency management report was primarily related to COVID response, in particular the vaccine shortage and problems with rollouts. As a result of Mr. Baer's and Mr. Kaufman's report, the Public Safety Committee has embarked on some advocacy efforts. We will be writing a letter of support for Mr. Baer's recommendations in regard to the SR6 report and a letter of advocacy to move police and fire personnel to vaccine tier 1A, in which they are not included at this point. We also moved to write a letter in regard to access for vulnerable populations to the vaccine, but as previously noted, that letter is likely not to be sent at this point. As soon as our emergency management staff is provided with the information about the Mount Nittany Medical Center and other Seneca County vaccine provider phone registration systems, we will promote that information to the community. The public safety's next meeting is via Zoom, Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. Let's see, get back to your faces. Any questions on that report? All right. Next up is the Finance Committee report. I also attended Finance this month because Steve was unable to attend. The majority of our meeting was spent discussing the retention of Concord Public Financial Advisors to refinance the Pools and Parks loan and to discuss additional borrowing for Whitehall Road Regional Park. So the outcome of that was a motion that the Finance Committee recommended that the municipalities consider retaining Mr. Chris Gibbons with the purposes of refinancing both loans for a total loan amount of approximately $10.4 million. And the motion passed 5-1 with Ferguson Township dissenting. See. I'm sorry, that was for the February 1st meeting. At the February 11th meeting, I did support the motion that came out of there because it also included not just the additional borrowing, but also just a look into what kind of financing deal that we would get, strictly just refinancing the loan and returning the money to the municipalities, any savings, and also included refinancing and adding that additional money that we would save back into the park. So at that point, I did support that motion because it did include the option that I knew our board originally supported, which is to refinance the loan as it is either give the money back into to the municipalities or to invest it back into the park. We also discussed the Finance Committee work tasks and proposed revisions to the COG detailed budget. Really, that's about just things that have come out over past budget meetings, ways that we can improve on presentation of that budget. And so staff's going to take that feedback and incorporate it into the document. There was an update on Facility Committee, which we've already heard. And that was about it. So any questions on the Finance Committee meeting? All right, we'll move on to the Executive Committee meeting, which I also attended. We met today virtually 12:15. You're going to be seeing at General Forum the items that we discussed. For once, this meeting is coming before, or this agenda is coming before the General Forum. So we discussed the appointment of the SCLO Center Region Library Director, and you should see a recommendation coming from the Library Board for endorsement of the General Forum at our next meeting. We moved the Code Board of Appeal appointments to the General Forum, and once again discussed the retention of the finance consultant, Mr. Gibbons. So in this meeting, the Executive Committee, based on my request, slightly amended the Executive Committee slightly amended the Finance Committee's recommended motion. So the Finance Committee's recommended motion included, one, the borrowing of the 10.5 million with the caveat that less may be borrowed in order to maintain the current debt service while potentially extending the loan. Then the second item was to refinance the existing debt, and the amount of savings could be applied to Whitehall Road Regional Park or returned to the municipalities. We amended that to add that it may or may not extend the term of the loan. And this was a question that came up in that meeting. I had that question, and Joe Vigilone said he really thought it probably wouldn't, but for clarity's sake, we should know that it might. And then, so this motion passed unanimously, And the executive committee has the authority to retain Chris Gibbons on their own. It doesn't have to go to general forum. We voted unanimously to do so, to explore the loan refinancing. The fee for that is going to be $7,500. That's just to look into it. And if we move forward with it, the fee is going to be $30,000 for that, and it will be rolled into the loan. So you'll see that as a reduction in savings. In addition to that conversation, we had a conversation about the potential budget amendments. And there are 3 that are proposed. 2 of them are, I think, totaling approximately like $230,000, we'll say. And those 2 budget amendments are proposed to add to the amenity funds. And then the other budget amendment that will be proposed, which I'm not sure how this works because we already are spending the money and now we have to do a budget amendment to get the money. I'm not sure, Steve maybe could clarify that. But this one would be to pay the $7,500 from the Parks Capital Regional Fund balance. So we did move that the executive committee, as recommended by the finance committee, as amended by the executive committee, authorizes retaining Chris Gibbons to Concord Public Financial Advisors to investigate and advise the finance committee regarding the borrowings as recommended by the finance committee during their meeting of February 11th. Whew. In terms of the COVID wastewater research report that was recommended by public safety, we acknowledge that the general forum meeting is probably going to be really long and that we left it up to staff if they want to have that report on this agenda or move it to the March general forum meeting. Reviewing the community survey on climate planning. We're going to ask the general forum to authorize the release of the community survey. And then one note about that is that that's going to be there's no money in the budget for that. So that's going to be funded through the professional development line item coming from CRPA. So that's how that'll be funded. We authorized the executive director to extend the COVID leave program for employees until April 30th, 2021. We had a discussion, it was an interesting discussion on presentations to the general forum, like a policy. So frequently we have individuals come and want to present to the general forum, and there's really nothing written in terms of a policy for that and what the criteria should be evaluating, what criteria we should be evaluating in order to give a yay or a nay to that. So we had an interesting conversation about that, and basically circled around to anything of regional significance is up for, to be taken to the executive committee and possibly moved on to the general forum. I expressed a concern here that we still don't have criteria, and also we really don't promote this to the public. So typically it's really only somebody that's on the inside that understands how it's working to ever even get to that point where they can request from the executive committee. So we talked a little bit about how we can promote that and encourage community involvement. It was a long meeting, sorry. The general forum, the next thing we talked about was the general forum audio video enhancements. This has been discussed for some period of time. We have $15,000 from the 2019 budget rolled into 2020. And now we have it in 2021, rolled into 2021. We all agreed that it's a priority, but we also agreed that money is tight, and can we try to find the money in the budget in a similar manner to how we found it for the climate survey. Coming to the end, the executive director's report, Cindy Hans with CNET and the COG were in discussions, and Cindy offered, We have the opportunity to roll you guys out on YouTube. Do you want to do that? It doesn't cost anything. We said, sure, why not? It creates more public opportunity. Let's do that. So we're going to do that. We're going to be on YouTube through COG. And then there were just some requests from Penn State, one for a data for action lunch and learn. So you're going to hear more about that. And then maybe a 20-minute presentation on COVID, which I'm not sure what all that entails, but we'll hear more in the future. And that concludes my long executive committee report. Any questions? In terms of the whole Whitehall Road Regional Park loan, what are we getting? All of this kind of stuff. I think it would be a really good idea for us to have a conversation on our first meeting in March, if there's room on the agenda, to just kind of like understand the process and kind of pull that apart a little bit. In general forum, what we'll see is just basically, well, actually nothing, because executive committee already retained Chris Gibbons. So, so March will be plenty of time to have a conversation to sort of align around our own position again. All right, I'm the chair. So moving on, other committee reports, library director selection committee. All right, that's I also attended that meeting, and the big reveal will be at General Forum this month. The process was very thorough. It was a really good process, and it's something that we can be proud of. All right, staff reports, managers report. Dave, back to you.
You sure you're on a roll? I mean,
please make it stop.
all right. I'll cover mine. I had a meeting with Supervisors Strickland and Mitra. We talked about the forthcoming agenda item to consider the Financial Advisory Committee. There was a meeting of the municipal managers and myself, Ralph Stewart of Bellefonte Borough, Tom Fontaine of State College Borough, to talk about the proposed discrimination ordinance. Some of you may remember this. This goes back a couple of years, and it's been delayed for various reasons, but most notably because there's some interest in taking a regional approach to a Human Relations Commission and a discrimination ordinance that would prohibit, or at least provide, a mechanism for adjudication of complaints for discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations based on a number of certain defined classes: sexual orientation, gender identity, ability levels, etc. So we are going to have a follow-up meeting with the chairs of our respective boards, and then we'll place an item on the agenda for further discussion. I'm hoping to schedule that for later in this week, and then we may have this draft ordinance again for review in sometime in the spring, likely a March or April agenda for review by the governing bodies of those municipalities. We did have a meeting with the solicitor and the co-counsel, Joe Green, to talk about potential settlement options for the land use appeals filed by both Circleville Road and Nittany Valley Environmental Coalition relative to the Pine Hall Traditional Town Development General Master Plan. Dave Modricker and I have been working with the 7 Group to review respondents for requests for proposals for the solar power purchasing agreement that was solicited in accordance and in conjunction with the completion of the Public Works Maintenance Facility. We had 2 qualified responses received. We're going to have a recommendation for an award likely forthcoming, but we did have to get some additional information from those 2 respondents that we're waiting to hear back from before we're ready to present to the board. And then lastly, we met to consider some different grant funding options for the Park Hills Drainage Way project. I wrote this before we met this afternoon, and I shared with some of you earlier in the day that we're thinking that the DCNR Community Conservation Partnerships Program is probably not an ideal candidate for this specific project, but that there may be some other funding options to help defray that cost. So we'll continue to consider those, but it may not be on the agenda for consideration for March 1st. One potential funding source that Centrise pointed out is with the Commonwealth Financing Authority, or DCED, Department of Community and Economic Development. they have a greenways grant project that's not due until May. So it gives us a little more time. And based on our initial pass anyway, we think it's a much more qualified project. And before I take any questions, I just want to ask Centrise if she wants to expand a little bit on the community resilience building workshop that's being planned. Brandy alluded to it a little bit earlier in her presentation, but Centrise has been coordinating things from staff level.
Thank you, Dave. I'll share with you that this is the Community Resilience Building Program has been implemented in over 400 communities, none of which have actually been in Pennsylvania. So we are getting the opportunity and the invitation by the Pennsylvania Municipal League, who partnered with the Nature Conservancy and Pittsburgh Sustainability to implement this program here in Pennsylvania for the first time. So we're really excited to be doing that. It's a very community-driven participatory program. Each part of the exercise and step forward is facilitated by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Adam Wilker. We had our first kickoff meeting last week, and we have another meeting this Friday to complete a worksheet as well as a survey to help identify participants for the workshop to begin our mapping and analysis of our community, to identify the vulnerabilities, not just with infrastructure, for example, but also vulnerable populations, our social, economic, housing and where that's placed and how that might play into a crisis, for example. So being able to identify and really expand on some of the work that's already being done at a local level, but also at a regional level, we're hopeful that this document will just be a little bit more detailed, again, very community oriented and driven, with a lot of not just local residents, but also participants at a regional and local level. So more to come as we continue our step forward. We are looking to have the workshop hosted before April 1st.
All right, great. Thanks, Centrise. Thanks, Dave. Any questions for either? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the Public Work Director report.
Thank you. My report is in your packet as usual. The only item I wanted to focus your attention on is the new Public Works facility. We should have substantial completion by the end of this week. Following that, there's a number of other steps. We have furniture installation, building commissioning, indoor air quality testing, and there'll be a rather lengthy punch list of items, but I'm expecting sometime mid to end of March, Public Works will occupy the building. And there's a number of, systems that we still have to test and get operational. Training is, starting tomorrow on different components, the in-ground lifts, the fluids and hydraulic systems. Next week, we'll be starting to get training on the electrical components, the lighting, generator, the automatic transfer switch, and so on and so forth. So it's moving along. Our construction manager that is full-time will no longer be on the job after substantial completion. And so it'll basically be the architect and I closing out the job while contractors work on, numerous, what we're calling punch list items. But still within budget, but a little bit over time. That's all I had to report.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave? All right, that's some exciting news. And
if it wasn't quite the environment we in, I'd be probably taking everybody for a tour, but sometime we'll do that. And maybe I can put together some kind of, slide presentation for the group that are interested.
Let's get a little GoPro thing happening through the halls and stuff.
Okay.
We will talk about a ribbon cutting or something more. So hopefully maybe in April when the building's occupied and we're a little bit outside. We could do something that's, it's obviously a small, kind of a thing, but it would be nice to get the board together and do a socially distant ribbon cutting with appropriate safety protocol in place.
Sounds good.
and we'll brainstorm on that a little bit.
Thanks. All right, next up, Planning and Zoning Director report is.
Jenna had to jump off here, but her report's in your packet. Planning Commission met on February 8th, focused on the West College Avenue Student Housing Land Development Plan. Also had some discussion about the tree preservation ordinance. And then also included in the report is an update on active land development plans that are currently under review. Some additional tasks that the zoning administrator and the community planner are working on. And then to close out her report, she describes the zoning variance request from State College Borough Water Authority that the board had an opportunity to consider earlier this evening.
Thanks, Dave. I'll just comment. I watched the Planning Commission meeting. I guess I attended it virtually, and was just, in awe of the conversation about the problem with alleys. Oh gosh, it's just like, it's a bottomless pit of issue. So just really looking forward to us, spinning the wheels on that, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, and that's it's on the work plan for the Planning Commission, this year to start to evaluate some options for that. As the board's had a chance, we talked about this in the past. It's a challenge. There's no easy button. If there is, we would have pushed it already. It's also not been an issue to the degree that it's been a top priority in lieu of other projects.
Absolutely.
By the board and by staff. So we're trying to work it in. I know Jenna's been meeting with some of the Planning Commission members to talk about some potential options. And as I think I've said in the past, there's kind of an inverse relationship between how difficult the problem is to solve and how expensive it is. So the easier it is to solve, the more expensive it is. The more difficult it is to solve, the less expensive, but also expensive it is. So, and what I mean by that is that I think we know what our potential resolutions are. It's just a matter of, what's palatable, what does the board want to consider and what do we want to invest our resources in?
Thanks, that's great. Yeah.
I was part of that discussion. I was really there on the meeting for the tree preservation ordinance, not the development plan. Excuse me. But what I didn't say, but I think it's important to note is that the developers and staff, we have to work within the rules and ordinances and regulations that are in place at the time. And really the discussion on private alleys is a much bigger and separate issue. So I think we, tried to work within the boundaries that we have. And
absolutely. Yeah.
I
appreciate, sorry.
I mean, when the manager and the board bring it to the forefront and put it on my plate, I can address the issue maybe in a more comprehensive way. But, for the 20 years that I've been involved in private alleys, we've been handling them consistently and following the direction of the board at the time.
Thanks. I really appreciate the challenge and I appreciate your handling of it. Thank you. All right. Lisa.
I just wanted to ask if Dave happens to know when that student housing land development plan would be in front of the board, what the timing there is.
I expect the preliminary land development plan to be presented to you for consideration at a March meeting. I haven't had a chance to get a recent update from Jenna on that, but I'll confer with her. But the preliminary plan was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission. So they did submit a recommendation on it. I think there's maybe some comments that are outstanding before it's ready for review. But I would anticipate it being, either the second meeting in March or the first meeting in April. I can get a more maybe accurate response to that and circulate by email.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Last but not least, Chief of Police report, please.
Thank you. Included with the board packet is the police department's activity report for the month of January. Summary, calls are a little lower than what they were last year at this time pre-COVID. Calls of interest. Officers assisted the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General Child Predator Unit execute a search warrant at a residence in Ferguson Township. The AG's office charged a 57-year-old Ferguson Township man with 50 counts of child pornography. Act 27 of 2015 requires all police departments, if victims consent, to submit all sexual assault evidence kits to a approved laboratory for analysis. Each department must then submit an annual report detailing the number of backlog or untested kits that we have. We report that to the Pennsylvania State Police. For the year 2020, we had no untested kits. As far as for detectives' investigations, we had a few child abuse investigations. 2 of them are still open and ongoing. We arrested a 35-year-old State College woman for burglary. She entered her ex-employer's residence and was stealing property and drugs from inside the residence. We also arrested a 59-year-old Bellefonte man. He was charged with intimidation of witnesses, retaliation against a witness, and ethnic intimidation. Essentially, he was sending the victim, in this case, a wide variety of communications threatening the victim against providing any testimony in an upcoming case. And there's more detail in my report, so I'll take any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the chief? Looks like none. And again, congratulations on that effort that you led to open that cold case and to assemble that team. It's really, it's quite remarkable. Thank you.
Very, very, very rewarding. And the next step is, I mean, it's one of those things that, I mean, just as we kind of said earlier, we have 2 more cases that we need to, get working on those 2. Not that we haven't been working on them, but, be able to move forward with those as well.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to communications to the board. All right. Seeing none, calendar items for February and March.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. All right. Looks like we've come to the end of the agenda. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right.
Good night.